Click here to subscribe for free to reluctantpreppers.com.
In a funny little event, Elijah, I should bring this in before we go to the next question. In 2011, there was a lot of talk about Germans demanding repatriation of their New York Federal Reserve gold. The New York Fed held a lot of German account allocated gold and refused to give it back. Okay, why did Germany demand in 2011 their gold? Because they heard of an Obama plan to wreck Ukraine and disrupt the Gazprom energy supply and bring in sanctions against Russia. And Germany didn't like it, and they said, well, oh my gosh, if that's your plan for 2013 and 14, then we better demand our gold back. So that's why they demanded their gold back.
Right, and they haven't gotten pretty much any of their gold back, right?
I think they got something like 30 tons out of 330.
Right, so only about 10%. And that 330 tons, that's not even all of Germany's gold. That's only a small percentage that they actually requested back.
I believe Germany has something like 4,500 or 5,000 tons of gold. So, yeah, we're talking about 330 tons, which is less than 10% of the German gold reserves, but a very important 10% because the Americans stole it. Londoners stole it. The word rehypothecate, that's a very wonderful word. It means stole, steal. It's hilarious. Let's do a bail-in. What's that? That's the theft of private account money. Steal. Bail-in means steal. Gosh, what does the word recovery mean anymore? Nothing. Nothing. We're being re-indoctrinated on language, on terminology. QE is stimulus. Who does it stimulate? What does it stimulate? It stimulates the cost structure by lifting it. It stimulates speculation and enables a huge backdoor bailout to Wall Street banks to buy out their worthless bonds. You know, I got a very simple question for you, Elijah. Do you think the U.S. government's going to ever pay back its creditors for the debt they hold?
Well, I mean, possibly, but probably in inflated dollars, if they will.
Well, in other words, they'll trade this toilet paper for a different colored toilet paper. That's not a payback. I asked if they're ever going to pay back on the debt. With real money is what I mean, and that's with gold. Now, the U.S. is going to pay back its debtors, its creditors, rather. Its creditors who hold our debt. They're going to pay it back with assets inside the United States, and it's already starting to happen. We have an interesting case going on right now in Venezuela where they're exporting beans, and Venezuela is exporting rice. And now they're a net exporter of crude oil, all for the purpose of raising currency, hard cash, in order to prevent a collapse of their Bolivar currency. They're trying to get foreign currency to prevent their domestic currency from collapsing. They're seeing inflation and deep damage to their domestic currency. That's coming to the United States, and we're starting to see it in a unique little niche right now. The Chinese are starting to dominate west of the Mississippi River, so the western half of the United States. They're starting to dominate in hay farms, alfalfa and other types of hay farms. Those farms are exporting 100%. Sorry. Those farms are exporting 100% of their hay output to China to feed livestock in China. Now, whether they entirely need it or not is another issue. I think China is making a statement here. They're making a statement that they can force export of key U.S. output. It's just the beginning. I think 3 years from now, we're going to have all kinds of stories of company after company, farm after farm, industry after industry, exporting in order to raise hard currency so the hard currency can prevent the new shit dollar. I call it the shice dollar in nice circles. So the new shice dollar will not implode. The U.S. is soon going to be given an ultimatum that you must now create your own domestic dollar. I call it the Scheiss dollar. That's German for shit. So the Americans are going to have to create their own new dollar, domestic usage only. And I'm hearing 2 rounds of 30 to 35% devaluation. That's what I'm hearing, Elijah, and I think it's unavoidable because the whole world is objecting to QE. The whole world is objecting to the hypermonetary inflation coming from the United States because it's directed to key fascist corners and not to the U.S. public. It's kind of ironic that the U.S. public is told you can have yourself a 4% mortgage, give or take. It doesn't matter. Why doesn't it matter? Because the banks don't want to lend to a guy with insecure income. Because the banks can get a better deal with, say, a Wall Street private equity fund. Because the bankers have been told, cooperate with the Chinese, who are putting billions upon billions of treasury bonds on the table, and they want property. So the Chinese are buying commercial property. This is going to all end badly. The United States is going to lose the dollar. And that's why you've got the whole U.S. police structure starting to look like the military. Because the United States is going to lose the dollar. And that'll start some chaos economically from price and supply problems. That's how I see it, Elijah.
All right, so I wanted to move now to some viewers' questions. This viewer wants to know, what are your observations of America's role in the world since the new millennium?
Well, bear in mind that the United States is getting wrecked and becoming a very deeply fascist state where neocon means neo-Nazi. I think the U.S. is going to become a site for Chinese efforts to reindustrialize the nation. The U.S. is going to have new corporate masters, not completely, but in a significant way. China is going to engage in commercial colonization. They've already got about 6 or 8 industrial parks in the United States, and it's not permitted to appear in the press. I think they're going to take a significant slice out of output, and I gave the example of hay to feed livestock as just one example. But gosh, suppose they later say, we want all your apples. Then there'll be no more apples in American supermarkets. I think the U.S. is going to be totally depleted from an extraordinary effort to preserve a current broken system. We're doing everything we can to preserve the dollar, everything we can to preserve the big banks, and as a result, we're going to be depleted, without energy, without resources in the next chapter. Forget the next millennium. Let's just worry about the next chapter. We're going to be broke and depleted. No energy, no gut. I think the U.S. is going to suffer consequences of debt default and debt restructure. I wouldn't be at the least bit surprised if we lose some U.S. territory. I focus on Hawaii because, hey, let's face it, China really likes the naval base. They need one. And maybe they'll force it with some of the debt they hold. You know, when you have foreigners own more than half of your debt, you lose control of your country, and that's happening. The U.S. is going to be forced to contend with a domestic new Scheiss dollar. They're going to lose the global reserve, and in the next chapter, we're going to have price problems. Import prices are going to just go way up, like over 100% change in the next few years on import prices. We're going to have supply problems. I think we're going to have cash problems. I don't think ATMs are going to, you're going to see a lot of ATMs just close down, and I have rocks thrown at them. The U.S. is going to become a pariah nation, Elijah, kind of under financial quarantine. And you're starting to see it already now with foreign banks saying, we don't want U.S. clients anymore. We don't want the problems from your government anymore. We don't want your FATCA rules. We don't want to share data. We don't want to have the extra costs. to just deal with the U.S. client base, so we don't want you Americans anymore. It's going to become a pariah state. It could become very, very much wasted, like Mad Max. I mean, it's a movie, but gosh, take a look at Detroit. By the way, Detroit's getting bought up neighborhood after neighborhood by China. And there are large blocks of Detroit where the water and electricity is no longer supplied. Does that sound like a third world nation to you? I think we're going to see the U.S. become recognized more as a third world nation. And I point to war and outsourced industry as the two main reasons, along with a lot of fraud. Who wants to buy U.S. Treasury bonds if you've got counterfeit by J.P. Morgan? J.P. Morgan has sold twice as many Treasury bonds as were issued. Well, gosh, that's called counterfeit. But they're not prosecuted because they're part of the fascist business model, the bankers. Now, it's going to end really badly. That's how I see the U.S. in the new millennium. It's going to be a real pariah state that's largely messed up and wrecked.
Another viewer asks about how the collapsing dollar will affect people's debts. They ask, how will mortgages, student loans, credit cards, etc., all this debt be affected by a collapsing dollar? Do you think debts will be revalued as dollars become worth less? Would you rather be renting, or would it be better to have a mortgage?
These are all extremely difficult questions. I point to an event in the mid-1990s where Mexico came out with a new peso, and it was deeply devalued. I think it was on the order of 40%. And the question can be answered somewhat by looking at what Mexico did. They changed all the loan balances to reflect the old value, not the new value. So all the debt balances went up. The bankers were protected in Mexico. All the borrowers, the debtors, got screwed. I think the same thing is going to happen in the United States, but at the same time, I expect a different phenomenon to happen where there's going to be a wide rebellion against the creditors. They're just going to say, we're not going to pay you anymore, and we defy you to come and do your repossession. And they're not doing very well with repossession of homes. There's a lot of squatters, and even some of the buyouts by the private equity firms have not gone well because the people renting are not paying their rent. And they're even threatening the bankers who come paying visits to the property. I don't really know the full answer to how it's going to be played out with the debt balances, the loan balances. But I believe it's going to be a lot of chaos. We might even see a false flag attack where a lot of the records are gone, are destroyed. Kind of like Oklahoma City. That's where a lot of records for Fannie Mae fraud were located and disappeared with a fertilizer explosion. By the way, fertilizer explosion against a building would ruin its paint, not ruin its steel structure. Do some research, folks. Oklahoma City had numerous, huge series of explosives planted, and the public story was of fertilizer. How dumb do we need to be? Fertilizer will wreck your paint. Just like in the World Trade Center, jet fuel will wreck and burn your furniture, not your steel structure. So 1/3 of the Oklahoma City Marah building got blown out, not by fertilizer. So we might see some missing mortgage records, a lot of missing car loans records. I don't know. I don't know how it's going to play out. But would I rather be renting than have a mortgage? I don't know. I think I'd rather leave the country. I don't want to live in a fascist dictatorship. So that's why I left in 2007 when I received 2 death threats by U.S. Homeland Security. Hope that answers your question, Elijah.
Those are very interesting insights. And now moving forward here, John Digart from Mountville, Pennsylvania asks, when will the U.S. government stop being able to rig all the markets? Is it when the world stops taking the U.S. dollar for goods and services? When do you anticipate this?
He answered the question correctly. They will lose the ability to rig the markets when the dollar is not the medium of trade settlement. And when that happens, like I explained earlier, that will mean that the U.S. dollar debt security, the Treasury bond, will not be the main core reserve asset in the banking system. So when the dollar is not used in trade and when the Treasury bond is not used in the banking reserve system, the U.S. is going to lose its ability to rig the markets. So we should look forward to those 2 interconnected events as being the trigger for releasing the gold price. I foresee at least a $10,000 gold price per ounce. I foresee at least a $200 or $300 silver price per ounce. And that's not even addressing all the stolen gold from private allocated accounts and, official German type allocated accounts. Are they ever going to have to replace the German gold, or does the U.S. just get a pass for stealing? Like they stole the Kiev central bank gold in March. They stole 33 tons. Not in the news. I mean, this is what Nazis do. They stole the Czechoslovakian and Hungarian central bank gold in the 1940s. They stole the Libyan central bank gold in 2011. They stole the Kiev central bank 2014. Did they steal the Syrian central bank gold? I'll leave that as a question.
And this viewer is wanting to know about, it seems like no one anticipated that the markets would be rigged for so long, and that a lot of people, have missed the opportunity of in the stock market, the stock market nearly doubling in the last couple of years. So should people possibly invest any money in those markets, or should they just invest in gold and silver?
I don't like investing in rigged markets, but there's one exception, gold and silver. Because if they want to give it away at a discount price, I'm going to try to buy as much of it as I can. I got my limitation on funds. But do I want to buy the S&P at this current level? No. I mean, do people understand that over a quarter of the stock market is owned by the Federal Reserve? Do people understand that perhaps as much as another quarter or 40% of the stock market is owned by Wall Street banks? Do they even know who owns these things that they invest in and have their pensions fund locked into? Now, these are rigged markets. What they need to do is get out of the rigged markets while they're at the top and buy the rigged markets that are suppressed, like gold and silver. Are there any other assets that are worth buying? Sure, farmland. But I wouldn't want to buy jack shit in the United States. Period. I don't want to buy Iowa farm property. I don't want to buy Indiana farm property. I don't want to buy California property. There's a drought in California. I mean, I don't want acid rain and benzene rain from chemtrails falling on my farm fields. People need to understand what chemtrails are. For the idiots who believe that they're engine exhaust from commercial airplanes, wake up. I don't want to buy anything in the United States. That includes a ripe commercial building. I don't want to buy any farmland. I don't want to buy any industrial plant. I'd like to buy gold and silver and get it the hell out of the United States. One of the most difficult and excruciating questions I get from clients is, They say, I've got X thousand dollars of gold and silver and I want to leave the country. If I come to Costa Rica, if I go to Singapore, or if I go to Chile, can I take it with me? And I keep telling him, you know, you're going to have a tremendous challenge crossing the border. You made two mistakes, staying in the United States and buying your gold and silver for delivery there. Now, good luck getting it out. And I actually recommend to many of them, consider selling it, getting your cash out, and buying all over again in the new location. You just can't go through customs with $620,000 worth of gold coins. There's a form that says you have more than 10,000. You have to say yes. And you get stopped. I mean, gosh, if you go to a primitive kind of country and try to put, you know, several $1,000s or $120,000 worth of gold coins in a safety box, you better check it every single day, because I don't think it's going to be there after a few months. I know, not a client, he's just a friend, a very nice guy, took me for lunch once, and he had a best friend in Costa Rica who had a vault. And he said he had something like, you know, $450,000 worth of gold coins in there, a vault. And he had 2 guards with shifts to sit there and just guard the wall. He went away for a week and came back and found the whole wall and the whole side of his house blown off. You can't store these things in your backyard. You can't store it in a vault. I asked the guy, how much did the fellow pay the guards? And he said, I'm sure it was just something like, you know, a few $100s a week. I don't know. And I said, well, gee, I guess he didn't value the contents of his vault. No, the best thing to do is to use a professional, secure vaulting system in a foreign country. And I keep hearing over and over and over and over and over again, Hong Kong is the place. People who have, I got another friend, this is actually a friend of mine. He's going through a divorce, and he said, I got a house in Atlanta and I buried a bunch of gold in a decent sized chest in my backyard, and I can't get it out. I said, well, why don't you go in the middle of the night and just dig it out without lights? And he said, because my wife is watching like a hawk. I said, well, gee, can't you induce your wife to go to Florida for a week? Well, yeah, but then she has her sister stay in the house. This is the problem. You cannot store your gold on your property. You need to guard it. You can't let anybody see you, and you can't pay the guards minimum wage. I met a guy, this is a crazy story, at a club in Pittsburgh, and the bartender was listening to me go on about gold one time, and he said, you know, I believe in gold. I said, really? You own some? He said, oh, I own more than a little bit. I said, tell me more. And he said, well, I got 2 or 3 partners, and we're out in the North Hills of Pittsburgh, and we got about $1.5 million worth of gold coins buried in a little vault in a field, in a forest. I said, how do you guard it? How do you protect it? How much do you pay your guards? And he said, well, we pay them pretty well. And I said, can you trust them? And he said, oh, I don't know. I hope so. He's got the same problem. You got to kill the engineers. You got to kill the guards. And once you kill the guards, you've got no security. I got my own theories on a lot of different things, and some things I don't like to share. For instance, I'm hiding in full view. I've got a Gmail account. I mean, hey, I'm not doing anything wrong. If you want to find me, here I am. Hiding in full view. Oh, it's going to get so nasty, Elijah.
This one is from Clinton Fernandez in Australia, and he's wondering, I see Australia is involved with sanctions against Russia, yet involved in bilateral trade outside the US dollar with China at the same time. How do you see things playing out during the current crisis in Australia, and how will the Australian government behave internationally?
Australia is a real mess. They decided in the 2000 decade to overspend on defense as they installed their own neocons, Nazis, in power. So they built up their debt, and they became pretty much a military type vassal to the United States. Well, now Australia's in a bigger mess because China's buying up one mine after another and buying a significant stake in some of the big mining companies. And China has already bought, I believe, the majority of port facilities in China. And now China is bringing in a lot of their citizens to, it's hard to call it colonization. How about to disrupt the housing market in Australia? I'm hearing that the Chinese are bidding up certain city markets for property. And the same thing in Auckland, the capital of New Zealand. All right, the fact that they're opposing Russia while cooperating with China is going to put them in the crosshairs and bring about some rather extraordinary strains. I've got a principle. I haven't given it a name. Maybe I should, but maybe it should be called something like the corollary to Russian sanctions. You cannot piss off Russia. You cannot make sanctions against Russia without affecting your relationship with China. You cannot piss off China without affecting your relationship with Russia. Because China and Russia are slowly getting joined at the hip. They're even talking now about China taking an investment stake in Siberia. I'm talking about an investment stake for owning a piece of Siberia or a portion of Siberia or a percentage of Siberia. Maybe just a section. I don't know. This is very complicated now. But notice that the London bankers and the British government are on this delicate line saying they don't really want these sanctions with Russia while they're trying to encourage the Chinese RMB hub facility business to the London banking sector. This is getting very complicated. You can't separate the two, because now you've got Gazprom Neft saying that they'll accept Chinese yuan for payments. All right, well, the integration between China and Russia is becoming step by step more complete. The Energy Holy Grail deal that was announced in June, it's very complex but very long in its duration and enormous in its capitalization. This is going to marry the two countries. They've got a lifeline that's coming with the big pipelines. There's going to be more LNG to supplement that too, by the way. So Australia is going to find that they're in a very awkward situation. I think the Chinese are simply going to sit down and have a conversation with the Australian government leaders and say, start giving more lip service to the Americans, because we don't want you to do much of any of these sanctions against Russia. Or why don't you do sanctions in just these two really minor areas and tell the Americans that that's your level of cooperation and you're right behind the Americans, but not really. I think the Chinese are going to talk with the Australians and set them straight, just like they do the British.
Our last viewer's question is from Peter, and he asks, as proven by the European Currency Project, countries at different levels of economic development cannot share the same currency and all prosper with a stable economy. Are the BRICS countries and associates going to do the same mistake, or are they trying to find a way to protect the economies of member countries being at different levels of industrial development? Can they find a way for developing countries new BRICS associates, perhaps, to have their incipient industrial sectors protected against those of more developed countries until they can get the strength to compete on a level playing field?
Okay, that's a big question. I'd like to offer a preface that in Europe, it wasn't just different levels of economic development. It's that made the European nations different. And let's face it, different from Germany. If the European Union were a grand collection of nations that did not include Germany and Netherlands, then it would have been quite stable because it would rather be more homogeneous. No, the differences inside Europe had to do with debt levels, not so much economic development, debt levels, work ethic, socialist network, and fraud acceptance, levels of crime. They pretty much differed on all four of those with Germany, all the member nations. Okay, so let's just, go to the question now that I got my preface out of the way. The BRICS, that's Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. They're not all the same. I'd like to point just to one particular difference, not economic development, and not to fraud level, and not to social network. I like to point to their debt level. China and Russia have zero external debt. Let that statement sink in. They're perfect for creating a gold standard because they're not confused and altered and disrupted by the fact that they've got a big debt. They don't have any debt. Russia and China have zero external debt. India and Brazil do. So, if BRICS is to come together and march as one, once more, Russia and China, the strong element, the strong core, must carry India and Brazil for their debt. South Africa is an exception. It's an add-on. I've asked many smart people, what on earth did the BRIC do to add on BRICS? I mean, why do they need South Africa? And the answer I usually get is gold supply. There's a lot more gold in South Africa than they admit. And I believe we're going to get to a situation where we hear that a certain mine is shut down, but it's really not. And we hear about all these different arguments about, lots of different mines in South Africa are no longer viable. I believe that's a load of crap. You get in a decent labor union contract, or I'm told that they will never bring in Chinese laborers, but I have my doubts. I'm not going to get into that big argument discussion. But to be sure, the BRICS are not homogeneous. China has a lot more industry than Russia. Russia has a lot more resources than China. Even those two dynamic superpowers are very different. That's why they're going to get married at the hip. China's going to be supplied by Russia, and Russia is going to enjoy production from China. And what are Brazil and India going to provide? I think a market, not suppliers. They're going to provide buyers on Russian and Chinese credit. Watch the banks from China and Russia and other parts of Asia start to spring up more and more in Brazil. Brazil was included in the BRICS so that all of South America will make it into the BRICS. India was invited to the BRICS because of its market. By including India, I mean, it's a big market. They may someday surpass China in population. They're catching up really fast. They got people living on sidewalks all through Indian cities, but they got a very expansive middle class. By inviting India into the BRICS, they're going to assure that a lot of West Asia, a lot of West Asia is going to make it into the BRICS. I'm talking about Pakistan. I'm talking about Bangladesh. I'm talking about a lot of little nations, and especially those old former Soviet republics. They're all going to make it into the BRICS and Eurasian Trade Zone. I've got a different name in my mind, a different concept of what the BRICS represent. They're the gold standard nations. It's going to hit every single continent. The BRICS means gold standard. So the BRICS revolution is going to be returned to the gold standard. It's not going to be done through the banks. It's not going to be done through the Forex currency market. It's going to be done from trade. And as trade is settled in gold and the gold instruments and the yuan, the dollar is going to be phased out. The treasury bonds are going to be diversified away from, and the U.S. slips into the third world. We already meet 15 of 20 criteria for third world. We haven't had an honest presidential election in quite a while. We have falling bridges. We have carpetbaggers coming in. We got debt to the ears. And we're printing money. Isn't that what third world banana republic nations do? Print money and monetize their debt? And before you know it, they have hyperinflation, and then they have revolution, and then they have a new regime. Well, same thing's going to happen in the United States. It just takes longer. Now, the BRICS nations are going to have their challenges. They're going to expand their industry, and what I focus on with the BRICS the most is their development fund and its usage, and their movement toward conversion of Forex sovereign debt, mostly treasury bonds, conversion of those sovereign debt like treasury bonds into gold bullion. I focus on their projects. They talk about a $200 billion BRICS development fund. Then look at the entire list of their projects. And I may have mentioned this before in a previous show with you, but they talk about a Kenyan railway. They talk about a Nigerian railway. They talk about not an Angola. There's another nation in there, not Nairobi. I can't. There's another nation in there. They talk about Tanzanian railway. That's it, Tanzania railway. All right. They talk about increasing port facilities in Western Africa. They talk about certain improvements in the Middle East nations. They talk about a lot of different things, including even a global optical network for an alternative communications net that could someday, I'm thinking like 5 years from now, we might see two internets. One controlled by the U.S. and the West with censorship and espionage and monitoring, Big Brother, and the other one controlled by Russia and China that is basically undermined by the West with, cut cables at the seabed, like what the U.S. and Israel did to Iran. But, okay, here's the funny part of the BRICS Development Fund. Add up all their projects, including the multi-billion-dollar global network optical fiber. Add them all up. And the price tag comes to, I don't know, $25 billion. Then what are they doing with $200 billion? They're converting for gold. The projects don't add up. The rest is going to be converted to gold. They're going to create a giant BRICS central bank with gold. This is not going to end well for the United States. And the Americans who have been buying into this recovery nonsense and have been buying into the propaganda that gold is not a good investment, you're going to be a loser. You're going to be a pauper. You're going to be a debt slave and maybe homeless. You need to wake up. You need to buy gold. I would recommend getting rid of your pension fund, your 401ks and IRAs. Pay the 40% tax. Pay it. Then buy gold. Keep it outside the United States and put most of it in silver. And when silver goes from 20 to 40, you made up all your tax laws. I got news for you. Your 401k and pension cannot be drawn on in the future without paying tax. So the only big tax consequence is the extra 10% you must pay. You're going to have to pay taxes sooner or later. Are you never going to draw on your 401k? Of course you are. Maybe 12 years from now, 8 years, 15 years, whatever, then you pay taxes. Well, pay the taxes now. Get rid of them. You need to get out of bank accounts, out of stock accounts, out of anything dollar denominated, because the whole world is going to reject it. And then you're going to have the U.S. introducing the Scheist dollar. They've already got lots and lots of plans for it. They got warehouses full of certain blood red new republic dollars. Some of them are called, treasury. What do they call them? Treasury notes. The Fed issues Federal Reserve notes. The new ones are called treasury notes. They're going to be devalued. They're going to be for U.S. purposes only. A big storm is coming. It's already started. It's well along. And, you got some pretty ugly things going on, like the California drought. That's not entirely a natural event. It got help. It got help. They're trying to wreck the nation. Why do they allow, infected Mexicans to come through the borders in Arizona and California and New Mexico? Why are they allowing these things? They're trying to wreck the country. Why did Greenspan allow easy money? They wanted to wreck the country. Why do they allow all kinds of bond fraud for mortgages and MERS for title database? They wanted to wreck the country. They succeeded. Buy gold and silver. Keep it outside the U.S. Don't bury it in your backyard. Because when you leave the country, you're going to have a hard time getting it out. Hard time digging it up. Hard time getting it out. This is not going to end well. For those who don't own gold and silver, expect to die young, expect to die poor, expect to die sick.
Well, I hope it doesn't get that bad, but Jim, Willie, before we let you go, I just wanted to thank you so much for joining us today. And did you want to share with the viewers where they can find you?
The website is goldenjackass.com. On goldenjackass.com, you will find a free page, a lot of free material, public articles and interviews like this with links, little explanations for what they are, so you know what you're digging at. You can do some primary work if you're new to this, and bring yourself up to a level of better understanding. And if you're a veteran at this, might be a few of them that you find interesting in areas you hadn't thought much about or areas you hadn't read much about. But then sign up for the newsletter. The newsletter has been now in force for 10 years as of last April. So the 10-year anniversary. I'm very excited about it. And I just had a new milestone. I just had a couple weeks ago, I had order number 10,000. I haven't kept them all because, people subscribe for a couple of years and they go away. Sometimes they come back. And I've had 10,000 orders. This is a big wagon train. But the newsletter consists of two different documents, two reports. One is called the Money War Report. And notice that now we actually have war to support the dollar in an open way. It's very open what's going on in Ukraine as to war defending the dollar. And it's not clear, for instance, that Langley is behind the Kiev regime and the genocide and the thefts. So the Money War Report is one high-level report. The other one is the Golden Currency Report, which is much more ground-level activity, like gold and silver demand in China and India, and rule changes in India, and what's